The UESS Iron Wake was a small ship. Not the kind of ship that won wars, not the kind of ship that made admirals proud. It was a patrol frigate, old and tired, held together by good engineers and bad luck. It carried 94 crew members, a handful of weapons, and a captain who had seen enough fighting to last 3 lifetimes. Captain Han Dayun sat in his chair on the bridge and stared at the screen in front of him. The screen showed 5 cruisers and 1 dreadnought, all of them Veldrath, all of them massive, all of them sitting right in the middle of a neutral zone where they had no business being. "Engie," he said calmly, "open a channel." Cho Engie, the communications officer, was already working. She was the kind of person who learned languages the way other people learn to breathe. She spoke 11 alien tongues fluently. She had picked up 3 of them while being held hostage on a trade station 6 years ago. She did not like to talk about that. "Channel open, Captain," she said. Doyen leaned forward slightly. "This is Captain Han Doyen of the United Earth Star Service vessel, Iron Wake. You have entered a neutral corridor recognized by the Galactic Concord. Please identify yourselves and state your purpose." The response came quickly. The main screen flickered, and then there he was, Overlord Drisic of the Veldrath Dominion. He was enormous, even by Veldrath standards. His scales were dark like old iron, and his eyes burned yellow. He sat on a command throne aboard his dreadnought, the Throne of Ash, and he looked at Doyen the way a man might look at an insect on his dinner table. "Human," Drisic said, his voice deep and slow. "You will listen. The Veldrath Dominion claims all space within 30 light-years of our border. Your colonies, your stations, your ships, they now belong to us. You have 10 standard rotations to remove yourselves. This is not a negotiation. This is a kindness." The bridge of the Iron Wake went very quiet. Nari, the tactical officer, looked at Doyen. Baek Jisok, the chief engineer, looked up from his console in the lower deck and stopped chewing his pen. Even Quan Tae-woo, the Marine squad leader, who was 3 decks below cleaning his rifle, seemed to feel the silence through the walls. Doyen did not move for a long moment. Then he turned to Unji. "Did you get all of that?" "Yes, Captain." "And the translation is accurate?" "Completely." "Read it back to me, slowly." She did. Every word. Surrender. Colonies. Belongs to us. Kindness. Doyen nodded. He turned back to the screen, where Drisic waited with the patience of a creature who had never been told no. "We respectfully decline," Doyen said. Drisic blinked. It was the first time in a very long time that anyone had said those words to him. He tilted his great head to one side. Then he made a sound, a low rumble from deep in his chest. He was laughing. "You are brave for something so small," Drisic said. "Let me show you what bravery earns." He gave a signal. 2 of the cruisers fired, not at the Iron Wake, but close enough. Plasma bolts screamed past the frigate, close enough to rattle the hull and send sparks flying from the portside relays. The bridge shook. Someone gasped. Doyen did not flinch. "Nari," he said quietly. "Sir?" "Log that. Timestamp it. File it under hostile aggression in a neutral zone. Code it to Concord Law Article 9, and send it to UESS Command." Nari's fingers moved fast. Done. The Veldrath intercepted the outgoing data burst. On the Throne of Ash, a signals officer reported it to Drisic. The Overlord read it and laughed again, louder this time. A complaint. The tiny human ship was filing a complaint. He waved it away and told his officers to prepare the next phase of their expansion. But Doyen was not done. He opened a second channel, this one encrypted, tight beam, aimed directly at UESS High Command, 4 relay stations and 2 star systems away. He spoke 3 words into the microphone. "Doctrine 7. Confirmed." Yunji's hands stopped moving. Nari turned in her chair and looked at him. Down in engineering, Jisok put his pen down and closed his eyes. Taewoo, 3 decks below, heard it through the internal speakers. He set his rifle down on the bench, very carefully, and began putting on his armor. Everyone on the Iron Wake knew what Doctrine 7 meant. It was not a battle plan. It was not a strategy. It meant that a line had been crossed, that diplomacy was over, and that the full weight of everything humanity had built over 300 years of space travel was about to come down on whoever had been foolish enough to cross that line. On the bridge of the Throne of Ash, Sub-Commander Pelith noticed something on her scanner. She was younger than most of the senior officers, sharper than she was given credit for, and she paid attention to things that others ignored. "Overlord," she said carefully, "the human ship's reactor signature just changed." Drisik glanced at her. "Changed how?" "It tripled." He stared at her for a moment. Then he shrugged. "A small fire burns brighter before it dies." Pelith said nothing more, but she saved the scan data to her personal file. Something about the way the human captain had spoken those 3 words made her scales feel cold. Far away, at the edge of mapped space, a galactic Concord listening post picked up the Iron Wake's transmission. A young alien analyst, barely 2 years into the job, ran the words through the translation matrix. Doctrine 7. He searched the Concord database and found the file, classified, restricted, flagged with more warnings than he had ever seen on a single document. He read it. Then he stood up from his chair, walked to his supervisor's office, and said in a voice that shook only slightly, "The human said Doctrine 7. Somebody needs to warn the Veldrath. Somebody needs to warn everyone." His supervisor looked at him for a long time. Then she leaned back in her chair and said very quietly, "It is too late for warnings." Station Orisar was the largest diplomatic hub in the known galaxy. It floated in deep space, far from any planet or star, a city made of metal and glass, where 100 different species came to argue, trade, and pretend they liked each other. On most days it was loud and busy and full of politics. Today, it was full of fear. The emergency session had been called less than 6 hours after the Iron Wake's transmission reached the Concord's network. Ambassadors from 43 species filled the Great Hall, their voices rising and falling in waves of panic. But they were not panicking about the Veldrath invasion. They had expected that for years. What they had not expected was the human response. Ambassador Viruk took the floor. He was old, even by the standards of his insectoid species, and he moved slowly to the central platform. His shell was cracked in places, and his wings had not worked in decades. But when he spoke, every voice in the hall went silent. "You are afraid," he said. "Good, you should be, but not for the reason you think." He pressed a control on his wrist, and a holographic display appeared above the hall, the Concord's classified file on humanity. Most of the ambassadors had never seen it. It was restricted to the highest levels of clearance, and for good reason. "Let me tell you about humans," Viruk said. He began with the basics. Humans came from a planet called Earth, a harsh world, a world of earthquakes and volcanoes and oceans that could kill in 1,000 different ways. They evolved not as the strongest creatures on their planet, not as the fastest, and not as the most armored. They evolved as something far worse. "They are persistence predators," Viruk said. "They do not chase their prey quickly. They follow it, for hours, for days. They walk after it under a burning sun until it collapses from exhaustion and heat, and then they kill it. Their bodies were built not for speed, but for endurance. They can run and walk longer than almost any creature on their world. They do not stop." The hall was silent. Viruk continued. He explained that humans produced a chemical called adrenaline. When they were afraid or angry, this chemical flooded their bodies and did something remarkable. It removed the limits their brains placed on their muscles. For a short time, a human could move faster, hit harder, and ignore pain that would shut down any other species. They could lift objects that should have been too heavy. They could keep fighting with broken bones. They paid for it later, but in the moment, they became something else entirely. Their own bodies are designed to destroy themselves in order to survive, Viruk said. Think about that. Their biology includes a self-destruct option that they use as a weapon. He showed them the next part of the file. Humans did not enter shock when badly wounded, not the way other species did. A Veldrath soldier, when critically injured, would shut down. Its body would stop moving to preserve itself. A human did the opposite. A wounded human often became more dangerous, more aggressive, more unpredictable. The files showed medical reports from a border conflict 20 years ago, where a human soldier with a broken leg and 3 burns had crawled 200 meters to pull a fallen comrade to safety, then turned around and fired on the enemy until she ran out of ammunition. And then, Viruk said, leaning forward on the platform, there is the matter of their history. He showed them images from Earth's past, wars that lasted decades, weapons that could crack open the skin of their own planet, bombs that turned cities to ash and poison. The hall stirred with discomfort. They invented nuclear weapons, Viruk said, and then they used them, on themselves. Not once, twice. And then they built more, thousands more. They pointed them at each other, and lived for half a century under the promise of mutual destruction. And during that time, they also went to their moon, built thinking machines, and wrote poetry. He let that sit for a moment. But the most dangerous thing about humans, he said, is not their chemistry, not their endurance, and not their weapons. It is a concept they carry in their minds, a thing they feel in their hearts. My people have no word for it. The Veldrath have no word for it. Most species do not. Humans call it spite. He explained it carefully. Spite was the willingness to suffer, to lose, to destroy yourself, not for any gain, but simply to make sure your enemy did not win. It was beyond survival. A human would burn their own house down if it meant their enemy could not have it. They would fight a battle they could not win, just to make the winner bleed. The Veldrath have conquered over 400 star systems, Viruk said. They have never lost a war. They have fought herbivores and hive minds and peaceful traders. They have never, in 6,000 years, fought a predator. They are about to learn what that means. He closed the file. The hall was so quiet that the hum of the station's air systems sounded like thunder. Far away, across the stars, Overlord Drisik sat in his command chamber aboard the throne of ash, and gave an order. The humans had not surrendered. He had given them a chance, and they had wasted it. He ordered his fleet to strike the nearest human colony, a small mining settlement called New Gyeongju, population 12,000. It would be quick. It would be easy. It would send a message. On the Iron Wake, Captain Han Do-yoon received the intelligence report. The Veldrath were moving toward New Gyeongju. 12,000 people, miners, families, children, sitting on a rock with basic shields and no warships. Do-yoon read the report twice. He set it down. He looked at Yoon Nari across the bridge. "Wake the Marines," he said. 3 decks below, Kwon Tae-woo was already awake. He had not slept since Doctrine 7. When the call came, he stood up, checked his custom railgun, and looked at his squad of 40 soldiers. "Colony under threat," he said. 12,000 civilians. We are the only ship in range. Nobody said a word. Nobody needed to. They were already moving. Do-yoon opened a channel to UESS Command and recorded a short message. His voice was steady. His face was calm. "This is Captain Han Do-yoon, UESS Iron Wake. We are moving to intercept the Veldrath strike force at New Gyeongju. We are 1 frigate against a battle group. No reinforcements are expected in time. We will hold the line, or we will make them pay for every single kilometer. Iron Wake out." He closed the channel. The ship hummed around him as its engines pushed harder than they were designed to. Beg Jisok, down in engineering, was already talking to the reactor like it was a stubborn animal, coaxing it to give just a little bit more. Doyun leaned back in his chair. He was not afraid. He had been afraid many times in his life, and he knew what it felt like. This was something else. This was the feeling a human got when someone threatened the people they were supposed to protect. It was not fear. It was purpose. The first plasma bolts hit New Gyeongju's shield grid at dawn, local time. The sky turned white, and then orange, and then white again, and the ground shook so hard that the mining equipment in the deep tunnels rattled against the walls. 12,000 people looked up and knew that something terrible had arrived. The Veldrath battle group hung in orbit like a row of iron teeth, 5 cruisers spread in a wide formation, and the dreadnought Throne of Ash sitting behind them like a king, watching his soldiers work. Overlord Drisek had not even bothered to come to the observation deck. He was eating his morning meal in his quarters. This would not take long. But the colony's shields held. They were not military shields. They were mining-grade energy barriers, designed to protect the settlement from asteroid debris and solar storms. They were not supposed to survive orbital bombardment. They survived anyway, because 3 star systems away, Baek Jisok had hacked into the colony's power grid through the Iron Wake's long-range systems, and was rerouting every drop of energy from the mines, the factories, and the water processors into the shield generators. The lights went out across New Gyeongju. The shields stayed up. Then the Iron Wake arrived. It came in fast, too fast for a ship its size, burning its engines at a level that made Jisok wince, even as he was the one pushing them. Captain Han Do-yoon did not slow down. He did not circle the planet to assess the situation. He flew the Iron Wake straight into the bombardment zone, slipping under the shield bubble like a fish diving into a coral reef, and he started shooting from inside. The Veldrath had never seen this tactic before. Their doctrine said that a defender stays behind shields and waits. It did not say anything about a defender using the shield as a hunting blind. Yunari fired with a precision that made the Veldrath gunnery officers stop and stare at their screens. She did not aim for the kill. She aimed for the lead cruiser's engine array. A careful surgical strike that cracked 3 of its 4 thrusters and left it drifting. Now the Veldrath had a choice: protect the crippled ship or leave it behind. Their code of honor would not allow them to abandon a vessel. They pulled closer together to shield it. Doyun smiled. "That is what I wanted," he said quietly. He gave the order, and down on the surface, the miners of New Gyeongju did something incredible. They loaded their industrial mining charges, massive explosive packs designed to crack open asteroids, onto the colony's magnetic rail launchers and fired them straight up into orbit. The charges were not smart weapons. They had no guidance systems, no tracking, no finesse. They were big, dumb rocks full of fire, and they hit the clustered Veldrath ships like a fist hitting a table. 2 cruisers lost their forward shields entirely. One took a charge directly to its hull and began venting atmosphere from 3 decks. The Veldrath had not expected this. They had expected a quiet colony that would surrender or die. They had not expected a colony that would fight back with mining equipment. Drisek, no longer eating, stormed onto his bridge and ordered ground troops to land. 800 Veldrath soldiers, tall and armored and bred for war, descended to the surface in heavy dropships. They expected to meet frightened civilians. They met Kwon Tae-woo. Tae-woo had 40 Marines and 200 armed miners. The miners were not soldiers. They were people who used plasma cutters and explosive charges every day, and had decided that those tools worked just as well on enemies as they did on rocks. Tae-woo organized them into teams and spread them across the mining tunnels that ran beneath the colony, like veins under skin. The Veldrath advanced in perfect formation. Lines of armored soldiers moved through the colony's outer sectors with discipline and power. They were larger than humans, stronger, and their personal shields could absorb small arms fire. They had conquered hundreds of worlds this way. The first tunnel collapsed on them without warning. Tewu had rigged the ceiling supports with deck cord. 40 Veldrath soldiers disappeared under 1,000 tons of rock. The rest of the column stopped, confused. That was when the miners hit them from the side tunnels with industrial lasers that cut through Veldrath armor like it was paper. The fighting became close and ugly. In the narrow tunnels, the Veldrath size worked against them. They could not form their battle lines. They could not use their heavy weapons without risking collapse. The humans fought in small groups, hitting fast, falling back, collapsing tunnels behind them, and hitting again from a different direction. Tewu held a choke point at Tunnel Junction 7 for 2 hours. He stood behind a wall of sandbags made from ore sacks and fired his custom railgun until the barrel glowed red. A plasma bolt caught him in the left shoulder, burning through his armor and into the muscle beneath. He grunted, switched the rifle to his right hand, and kept firing. A Veldrath officer, watching from the rear of the assault force, recorded a note in his combat log that would later become one of the most famous lines in galactic military history. "We shot the human. He did not stop. We shot him again. He became faster." The Veldrath ground force broke, not all at once, but in pieces. A squad here, a platoon there. Soldiers who had never known defeat, suddenly discovering what it felt like to fight something that simply refused to die. Of the 800 who landed, only 300 made it back to the dropships. They left their dead behind. The humans did not. In orbit, Sub-Commander Pelith watched the data feed with growing horror. She pulled up the Galactic Concord's classified file on humans, the one Drisic had refused to read. She read it now. Every word, every warning, every note, written by scientists and soldiers and diplomats who had studied humanity and come to the same conclusion: do not fight them. The Iron Wake took a heavy hit during the retreat. A plasma lance from one of the cruisers punched through the lower hull and tore apart 3 compartments. Gisek was holding the reactor together with emergency welds, creative wiring, and language so foul that Unji later said she learned 2 new words. But Doyun had done what he needed to do. The Veldrath battle group pulled back to regroup, dragging their crippled ships and their broken soldiers with them. As they retreated, Doyun opened a channel. His voice was calm and clear, the way it always was, the way it had been since the first moment of this fight. "Overlord Drisic," he said, "that was 1 frigate and some miners. Imagine what happens when we send the fleet." On the bridge of the Throne of Ash, Pelith intercepted the message. She stood very still. She felt something move through her body, a cold, heavy feeling that started in her chest and spread outward to the tips of her claws. Her species did not have a word for this feeling. 72 hours after the siege of New Gyeongju, Overlord Drisic assembled the largest Veldrath fleet in 500 years. 60 warships, cruisers, destroyers, heavy carriers, and 3 dreadnoughts gathered at the edge of Veldrath space like a storm building over the ocean. It was a force designed not just to win, but to erase, to leave nothing behind, to make the galaxy forget that a species called humanity had ever dared to say no. Drisic stood on the bridge of the Throne of Ash and looked at his fleet through the forward windows. His shoulders still ached from where a piece of his own bridge had fallen on him during the retreat. He had not told anyone about the pain. He had told himself it was nothing. But every time he moved his arm, he remembered the words of the human captain, and the ache became something worse than physical. Sub-Commander Pelith stood behind him. She had spent the last 3 days reading everything she could find about humans. She had read the Concord file. She had read captured human literature, military reports, and history. She had read about a place called Thermopylae, where 300 humans had held a mountain pass against an army. She had read about a city called Stalingrad, where humans had fought over single buildings for months, in the cold and the dark. She had read about a ship called the Bismarck, and a fortress called Masada, and a frozen lake called Chosin. And every story had the same lesson. Humans did not know how to give up. "Overlord," she said carefully, "I must advise caution." Drisek turned to her. His yellow eyes were flat and cold. "You read the human file." "I did. And it frightened you." Pelith chose her next words very carefully. "It informed me. The humans are not what we expected. They are adaptive, creative, and they possess a tolerance for suffering that is—" "They are small," Drisek said. "They are soft. They bleed easily, and they die easily. They held one colony with tricks and desperation. Tricks do not work twice." Pelith said nothing more. She had learned, from reading human history, that the most dangerous moment in any conflict was when a powerful leader decided that their enemy was beneath them. Humans had a word for this too. They called it hubris. The fleet jumped. On the Iron Wake, still in orbit over New Gyeongju, still patched together with emergency repairs and willpower, Captain Han Doyun sat in his chair and watched the long-range scanner. 60 contacts appeared at the edge of the system, bright and terrible, like a constellation that had come to kill them. Doyun closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, his face was the same as it always was. Calm, still, the kind of still that frightened people who knew what it meant. "Unji," he said. "Did Command receive Doctrine 7? Cho Unji checked her console. "Response fleet launched 48 hours ago, Captain. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. 6 hours. 60 Veldrath warships against 1 broken frigate and a mining colony." 6 hours! Doyen nodded. "Then we hold for 6 hours. Nobody on the bridge argued. Nobody asked how. They simply began to work." What followed was the longest 6 hours in the history of the Iron Wake. Doyen used the asteroid field around New Gyeongju as a maze, hiding the frigate behind spinning rocks, darting out to fire, and vanishing again before the Veldrath could lock on. The asteroids were dense and unpredictable, full of metal deposits that confused sensors. The Veldrath ships were big, and their formations were rigid. They moved like a parade. Doyen moved like a ghost. Nari scored kills that should have been impossible. She targeted ammunition stores on a destroyer, and the ship blew itself apart from the inside. She hit a cruiser's reactor vent at an angle so precise that the plasma backflow melted its own engine room. She fired with the calm focus of someone who had found the one thing in the universe she was born to do. Baek Jisek performed 3 emergency reactor restarts during the battle. Each time, the reactor should not have come back online. Each time, Jisek did something that no engineering manual had ever described, using parts that were never meant to go together. And each time, the reactor coughed and growled and came back to life like an old dog that refused to stay down. 7 Veldrath ships fell to the Iron Wake during those 6 hours. 7 ships, each one 50 times the size of the frigate that killed them. Drisek could not believe it. He could not understand it. He ordered his entire fleet to focus fire on one single ship. A plasma lance from the throne of ash itself punched through the center of the ship and erased decks 4 through 7. The lights went out. The gravity failed for 10 seconds. Jisok reported from engineering that the reactor had maybe 20 minutes left before it went critical. Doyen ordered the crew to the escape pods. 94 people began moving toward the evacuation points. All except 3. Doyen stayed on the bridge. Nari stayed at her console. Unji stayed at hers. Captain, Unji said softly. The pods are launching. Good, Doyen replied. You should go with them. No. She did not argue. She turned back to her console and continued monitoring every frequency. Because that was her job, and she would do it until she could not. And then, the stars behind the Veldrath fleet began to move. It started as a shimmer, a ripple in the darkness, like heat rising from a road. Then, the ripples tore open, and light poured through. And out of that light came ships. Human ships. 120 of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a perfect crescent formation that curved around the Veldrath fleet like a pair of open arms. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, missile frigates, electronic warfare platforms. And in the center, the flagship, the UESS Halasan, a dreadnought so large that it made the Throne of Ash look like a toy. The human fleet did not hail, did not warn, did not ask for surrender. They opened fire. The battle lasted less than 90 minutes. The Veldrath fought bravely. Pelith would say later that her soldiers did everything their training asked of them. But their training had been built for a different kind of enemy. Human ships did not hold formation. They flowed and shifted. Groups of 3 and 4 moving together like packs of wolves, covering each other, flanking, retreating, and striking again from new angles. Electronic warfare blinded the Veldrath sensors and filled their communications with noise. Boarded teams hit crippled ships with terrifying speed. Quan Te Wu, his arm in a sling, led a team onto a Veldrath cruiser and captured its bridge crew in 11 minutes. Drisek watched his fleet crumble. Ship after ship went dark on his display. Pelith stood beside him, and for the first time, she spoke without asking permission. Overlord, she said. They are not fighting like prey. They are fighting like something that was waiting for us to get close enough. The Throne of Ash took a direct hit to its command spire. The ceiling cracked. Drisek was thrown from his throne, and when he rose, there was blood on his face. His blood. He had never seen his own blood before. She ordered a full retreat. Less than half the fleet escaped into faster-than-light travel. The rest drifted in silence among the asteroids. As the Veldrath fled, the human fleet did not chase them. Instead, the Halasan broadcast a message on every frequency, in every language, so that every ship, and every station, and every listening post in the sector could hear it. The voice belonged to Admiral Shin Hyong. It was calm. It was measured. It carried the weight of a woman who did not need to shout to be heard. This is Admiral Shin Hyong of the United Earth Star Service. You entered our space. You attacked our people. You were given a chance to leave. You chose war. We did not choose this, but we will finish it. Return to your territory. Do not come back. There will not be a third warning, because there will not need to be. The message ended. The silence that followed was the loudest thing the galaxy had ever heard. 6 months passed. The galaxy, which had held its breath for so long, slowly began to breathe again. The Peace Summit was held at Station Orisar, in the same great hall where Ambassador Varuk had opened the classified file on humanity, and told a room full of frightened aliens what was coming. Now that same hall was full again, but the fear had a different shape. It was quieter now, more respectful. For the first time in 6,000 years of recorded galactic history, the Veldrath Dominion had requested terms. Not demanded, not dictated, requested. The word alone sent shockwaves through every diplomatic channel in known space. Species that had lived under the shadow of Veldrath power for centuries sat in the gallery and watched with wide, unblinking eyes. Sub-Commander Pelith walked into the hall alone. She wore a simple military uniform, stripped of the heavy metals and golden chains that Veldrath officers usually carried. Drisek was alive, somewhere in the Dominion's capital, but his name was no longer spoken in the halls of power. The loss had broken something inside him. Not his body, but his legend. And for the Veldrath, legend was everything. Pelith had risen to take his place. She was the Dominion's new voice, and she carried herself differently now. She stood straight, but there was no arrogance in it. There was something else instead. Something she had learned from studying months of human history and behavior. She had learned the value of walking into a room without needing everyone in it to be afraid of her. Representing humanity was Cho Eunji. She had been promoted twice since New Gyeongju, once for her service during the battle, and once because the UESS Diplomatic Corps had realized that a woman who could translate 11 languages and had survived being shot at by a dreadnought was exactly the kind of person you wanted at a peace table. Eunji walked into the hall in a pressed uniform, with her hair pulled back and a calm, polite smile on her face. Several alien delegations physically stepped away from her path. They had all read the battle reports. They knew what the Iron Wake had done. They knew what the fleet had done after. And they knew that the small, smiling woman in front of them had been on that bridge for all of it. The terms were simple. Mutual recognition of borders. A non-aggression agreement that would last 100 standard years. Reparations for the damage to New Gyeongju. And a formal, public acknowledgement from the Veldrath Dominion that humanity was a sovereign power, equal in standing, not to be threatened or subjugated. Pelith read the terms. She did not argue. She did not negotiate. She signed. The hall erupted in quiet murmurs, the alien equivalent of shock. A Veldrath commander signing a human document without a single objection. It was the kind of moment that historians would write about for centuries. After the ceremony, the delegations mingled in the hall's lower gallery. Pelith found Eunji standing near a window that looked out into the stars. She approached her slowly, the way one approaches a fire, with respect for what it could do. "May I ask you something?" Pelith said. Eunji turned to her. "Of course." "Your captain, Han Do-yoon, he faced our entire fleet with one broken ship. His reactor was failing. He could not have known that your reinforcements would arrive in time." Pelith paused. Her voice was quieter than Eunji had expected. "Why did he stay?" Eunji was silent for a moment. She looked out at the stars, and something moved across her face. Not sadness exactly, but the memory of sadness. The memory of sitting on that bridge and knowing that the ship was dying around her and choosing to stay anyway. "Because if he ran," Eunji said, "someone else would have had to stay. That is just how we are built." Pelith stood very still. She thought about those words for a long time. Then she said, "My people have conquered hundreds of species. We believed that made us strong. Your people fought to protect 12,000 miners on a rock that nobody wanted." She looked at Eunji. "I think that is a different kind of strength." Eunji smiled, not the diplomatic smile she wore in the hall, but a real one, small and warm. "It is the only kind that matters," she said. Far away on the surface of New Gyeongju, the colony was being rebuilt. The shields were stronger now, the buildings taller, the mines deeper. Baek Jisok had been reassigned to oversee the new defense grid, a job he accepted with loud complaints and quiet pride. He had already improved the shield efficiency by 40% and was working on 50. He told anyone who would listen that he was an engineer, not a soldier, and he did not understand why people kept giving him military awards. He hung the awards in his workshop anyway. Kwon Tae-woo was on the surface too, training a new colonial defense militia. His shoulder had healed, though it ached in the cold. The miners loved him. He hated the attention and loved the work. Every morning, he ran the new recruits through drills in the mountain passes outside the colony. And every evening, he sat on a ridge and looked at the sky and thought about the soldiers he had lost and the soldiers he had saved, and the difference between the two. Yoon Nari had been promoted and reassigned to the UESS Halasan. The gunnery crew aboard the flagship had heard the stories about her before she arrived. They had heard about the 7 Veldrath ships. They had heard about the reactor vent shot. When she walked into the gunnery bay for the first time, they all stood at attention and stared at her with a mixture of respect and fear. She was shorter than most of them. She smiled at them and said, "Show me your targeting scores." The scores improved significantly within the first week. They said she smiled too much during drills, and they did not know what that meant, but it made them try harder. Han Do-yoon was last. He was sitting alone on the observation deck of a medical station, 3 systems away from New Gyeongju. His injuries from the Iron Wake's final battle had been serious. Burns, fractures, a piece of shrapnel that had come very close to something important. The doctor said he was lucky. He did not feel lucky. He felt tired. He was watching the stars when Admiral Shin Ha-young found him. She walked in without ceremony and sat down in the chair beside his. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the stars move slowly past the windows. "I am giving you a new ship," Ha-young said. Do-yoon looked at her. "What ship?" "Heavy cruiser, the UESS Baekdu. Just came out of the shipyard. Best weapons, best armor, best crew I could find." Do-yoon thought about this. "Is it fast?" Ha-young smiled. It was the kind of smile that said she had known he would ask that. "Fastest in the fleet. Then I will take it." They sat together for a while longer, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the Veldrath were licking their wounds and learning a lesson that no one had ever taught them before. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Concord was updating its files and its maps and its understanding of the universe. And somewhere out there, on a rocky little colony that nobody had wanted, 12,000 people were going back to work, mining ore, building homes, and living their lives under a sky that was finally quiet. At Station Orisar, Ambassador Viruk sat in his office and wrote the final entry in the Concord's updated file on humanity. He was old, and his hands were slow, but he wrote every word with care, because he understood that some words matter more than others. The entry read, "Classification, Apex Predator, Sapient. Threat level, do not engage. Additional note, we have observed 4,217 sentient species across the known galaxy. Most seek comfort. Some seek power. A rare few seek knowledge. Humans seek each other. They will cross burning stars to bring home one fallen soldier. They will hold a line they cannot hold so that strangers may live. They will break themselves apart and put themselves back together and do it again. Not for territory, not for pride, but because somewhere in their strange and violent and beautiful evolution, they decided that no one gets left behind. They are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest, or the most advanced, or the most ancient. They are the most relentless. And if you are foolish enough to threaten what they love, may whatever gods you worship help you, because they will not stop." He put down his pen, he closed the file, and across the galaxy, in the silence between the stars, humanity kept watch.